Shri Chaitanya Manubhistam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Bandeham Shri Guru Shri Jataha Pajakamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Saguna Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabadutam Parichana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishaka Nivitamsa Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namini Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Siddhanta Swami Niti Namini Shri Varsavanavi Devi Dayitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vigyana Dayane Prabhave Namaha Madhur Ujvala Primadya Shri Rupanuga Bhakti Da Shri Gora Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Madhur Ujvala Primadya Shri Rupanuga Bhakti Shri Gora Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virudapa Apisidanta Dvantaharine Namo Guru Kishoraya Shakshad Vairagya Murtaye Vipralambara Sambodhe Padambujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachitananda Namine Guru Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate Gauravir Baba Bhumestvam Nirdesta Sajjana Priya Vaishnava Sarvabhuma Sri Jagannathayate Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarabhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahabhadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namne Guru Chase Namaha Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Saktikam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namestate Jayatam Suratur Pangur Mama Manda Matergati Matsarva Swapadam Bojo Radha Madana Mohano Vindaranya Divyad Vindaranya Kalpradumadaha Shrimad Ratnagara Simhasanastato Shrimad Radha Shila Govinda Devo Prastali Bihi Sevyamanam Smarami Shriman Rasa Rasarambi Vamsivata Tatastita Karsan Venuswaner Gopir Gopinatakstriyestuna Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhi Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Guru Pranama prayers ki jai. So today again we're going to talk about Canto 2, Chapter 9, verse number 34, and also continue the discussion of Srila Prabhupada and his disciples talking about Hegel, because many of the answers that Prabhupada is giving are so significant, and if we want to learn how to preach, then we must learn how Prabhupada preaches, because he's the best preacher. And this particular book, Dialectic Spiritualism, devotees are presenting the speculations and thoughts of people who are considered the greatest philosophers in the history of the world, at least the Western world, not the Eastern world, but the Western world. And Prabhupada is pointing out those points that they may have right and many of the points that they have wrong. So in order to understand how to answer questions given by outside people, who in the question will demonstrate some of the wrong speculations of these so-called great philosophers. So you must know how to answer them by using the same answers that Srila Prabhupada gave. So yesterday we were discussing, we stopped when we started talking about Hegel. In order to understand this reality, we must examine the interrelationships of things. And that's of the subject, on the subject of, Prabhupada says, only rascals think that there is no purpose in life, that everything is a result of chance. So that has been an atheistic point of view for a long time. And but Hegel himself, Shamsundar says, believes that everything has a purpose, that the whole universe is rational, and that it is unfolding under the direction of reason, the spirit of the Absolute. Okay, now this is a fundamental point of Western philosophy, and it is called the Logos, Logos, and it has a very big meaning for Western philosophy. It's a way, so when Hegel says, Hegel believes that everything has a purpose, that is, the whole universe is rational, and that it is unfolding under the direction of reason, the spirit of the Absolute. That this is all a bunch of Mayavad philosophy. But to understand it, we have to go back to this word logos, which is a Greek word. And it has a short definition and a long definition, so we will discuss both. So in the short definition of logos, it says, a principle originating in classical Greek thought, which refers to a universal divine reason, immanent in nature. So when Hegel says that previously he said that there's a world spirit. Now, what does he mean by that? I mean, you would obviously relate a world spirit to God somehow, but in a pantheistic way, where God is not a specific person. Well, here it says, Hegel believes that everything has a purpose, that the whole universe is rational, and that it is unfolding under the direction of reason, the spirit of the Absolute. Now, these are all big words, but this is Mayavad philosophy, so now we're going to go into it. So it says the principle originating in classical Greek thought, which refers to a universal divine reason, immanent in nature, yet transcending all oppositions and imperfections in the cosmos and humanity. An eternal and unchanging truth present from the time of creation, available to every individual who seeks it, a unifying and liberating revelatory force which reconciles the human with the divine, manifested in the world as an act of God's love in the form of the Christ. So the modern, the Christians who came after the Greeks, right, they sort of borrow this idea of the Logos, and they say it's Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now, to understand this more clearly, we have to go into the long definition of Logos. So, the longer definition is the following. The Greek word logos, traditionally meaning word, thought, principle, or speech, has been used among both philosophers and theologians In most of its usages, logos is marked by two main distinctions. The first dealing with human reason, the rationality in the human mind which seeks to attain universal understanding and harmony. And the second, with universal intelligence, the universal ruling force governing and revealing through the cosmos to humankind, the divine. Okay, so originally the word logos meant a word or a thought or a principle or speech. Now, they take that word and add on to it that, but using Mayavad philosophy. The Greeks were mostly Mayavadis, and they did not believe that God has a specific transcendental form, but they did believe that God has rationality and thought and also words. So, therefore, when Hegel says, when it's purported that Hegel says, everything has a purpose, that the whole universe is rational, and that it is unfolding under the direction of reason, the spirit of the Absolute. So Prabhupada's answer to that says, certainly, only rascals think that there is no purpose in life, that everything is a result of chance. Okay, so he agrees with Hegel that there is some purpose in life. So then Shamsundar next says, for Hegel, in order to understand this reality, we must examine the interrelationships of things. Now Srila Prabhupada says, we are teaching that the origin of everything is Krishna, and Krishna's energetic expansions constitute everything. And he quotes a verse from the 5th canto, 20th chapter, 17th verse, that says, O fire god, so it's referring to Agni, you are a part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, and you carry to him all offerings of sacrifices. So when you perform a Vedic sacrifice, there's fire. And with fire, there's heat and light. And there are mantras. And there's offerings made into the fire. What does the fire represent? It's Agni, the demigod. But why do we offer things like ghee and fragrant spices or fragrant substances, and also prayers, and sometimes food? Other things go into the fire. So the fire is representative of the fire of digestion. And what does digestion do? Food goes in the stomach and it's digested with heat in the form of hydrochloric acid, and it breaks things down. So, let's say you eat a very nice pizza, right? But later on, when you pass stool, it doesn't look like a pizza anymore. But that is what you put into your body, and it came out in looking differently and smelling differently. So, because it's been broken down, and ultimately, what remains in the body is glucose. It's a type of sugar, which is a fundamental food or nutrient for the body. It's like if you go to a hospital and you need intravenous, you can't eat. Let's say you have a severe problem with eating. So to keep you alive, they put glucose that goes directly into your bloodstream, and it supports it's a nutrient, a fundamental nutrient that keeps the human body functioning. So fire breaks things down through heat, and and therefore the fire sacrifice is you can actually see your offerings being consumed and being broken down into ashes. Okay, so then it says, "O fire god, you are a part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead." Well, all of us are part and parcel of Krishna, right? Including the demigods. So this statement is correct. And the name of the Lord is Hari. And you carry to him all the offerings of sacrifices. Therefore, we request you to offer to him the sacrificial ingredients we are offering the demigods, for the Lord is the real enjoyer. So whatever we offer to Agni in the form of fire, or Durga, or Surya, or Shiva, or Chandra, any of the demigods take your offering and give it to Vishnu or Krishna. They don't keep any of it. Otherwise, they would no longer be a demigod. They would be a demon. So, therefore, what's being said here is that Krishna is the real enjoyer. It's the Bhagavatam, 5th canto, 20th chapter, 17th verse. And now Prabhupada says, physical existence is heat and light, and these energies emanate from Krishna, the original light. Everything material and spiritual is composed of heat and light. One who has eyes to see that which is spiritual can see. So this is his answer to Hegel, who says in order to understand reality, we must examine the interrelationships of things. So the interrelationships of things, everything is related to Krishna. Of course, Hegel doesn't say that. So let's see what's next. Shamsundar says, Hegel attempted, see what does Prabhupada do? Every time there's a statement, he understands what that statement is pointing to, and then he gives the Krishna conscious explanation of the right answer or the right statement. And then, so now Hans Shamsundar says, Hegel attempted to establish the relationship between concrete realities. Isolated facts or moments, as he calls them, can never constitute the truth, because the truth is the whole, an integrated unity that is organic and dynamic. So you see, the language used by the speculator philosophers is always vague, and it sounds good, but what do they mean exactly? You're not sure. But Prabhupada immediately makes a concrete answer. If you want to understand concrete things, you have to have a concrete explanation. So he says, just by analyzing ourselves, we can understand that I, the soul, am existing, and that my bodily features are changing. When things change, we call them material. The spirit soul exists in all conditions, and that is the difference between spirit and matter. So that's the answer to Hegel attempted to establish the relationship between concrete realities. Well, the most concrete reality is the relationship of the jiva to Krishna, right? That's the most concrete. But you don't get that from hearing what Hegel says, right? Even though, in a vague way, he's saying something that has some semblance of truth to it, but it's vague, and it can turn into a complete speculation. So that's what's going to happen now. So Prabhupada he only says things that are completely concrete. He says, just by analyzing ourselves, we can understand that I, the soul, am existing, and that my bodily features are changing. Well, this, again, he's starting from the known. What is the known? That the jiva has up to 78% of Krishna's qualities. Not in full, but very partially, but up to 78%. And when the jiva gets very, very elevated, like Brahma, he has 78% in full. We don't. We have it very partially. So then Prabhupada says, then Shamsundar says, moments or factors in the organic whole progress in an evolutionary way according to the course set by reason, which Hegel calls the Weltgeist, the world spirit. Now, this statement by Shamsundar of Hegel's philosophy, this is rock bottom Mayavad philosophy, this Weltgeist, world spirit. What does Prabhupada say? Srila Prabhupada, that world spirit is a person. Unless you accept a personal God, there is no question of reason. The reason guiding everything in the universe is explained in Bhagavad-Gita. Maya dakshena prakriti suyate charasam hetunane navotya jagat viparivartate. This material nature is working under my direction. Bhagavad-Gita 9.10. Krishna says this. The whole material creation is working under Krishna's direction. Direction means reason. Therefore, so what does reason mean? It means using rational thought. Rational thought means you very carefully analyze something and you describe it correctly. And you figured it all out by using your reason, your reasoning ability, right? So he just showed the correct way to use reason. He said, look, everybody can understand that they have a temporary material body and a soul that is the real person, who is because it's the origin of consciousness and reason and not understanding. See? So immediately Prabhupada always refers to things that are concrete facts in Shastra, whereas the others, they talk with all these different words and concepts, and they're sort of dancing around the truth, but never hitting the truth exactly. So Prabhupada says, this material nature is working under my direction, Krishna says, Bhagavad-Gita 9.10. Direction means reason. Therefore, as soon as you speak of reason, you must accept the Supreme Person who is directing everything according to his supreme reason. This is exactly what the speculators don't do. They don't refer to Krishna as a person. They give these, just like Hegel, it says Weltgeist, it's German, means the world spirit. Shamsundar, would you say that all world events are expressions of this world spirit or world reason unfolding itself? If so, what is the ultimate purpose of that plan? Prabhupada, yes, there is a plan. Otherwise, why would Krishna say adyakshena, superintendents? So that's in the verse. Maya dakshena prakriti suyate saracharan. He's saying that he's the superintendent. He's the one that's organizing the whole material creation. Right? It's under his superintendence, under his watch, under his reason and logic and knowledge. There is a plan, direction, and also reason. The living entities are part and parcel of Krishna, and somehow or other they wanted to enjoy this material world. Therefore, Krishna has given them a chance, just as a father gives a chance to his small children to play. Krishna says, Sarva Shichaham Hridi Sanivisto Matak Smriti Jnanam Apahanam Cha. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Bhagavad-Gita 15:15. The whole plan is that Krishna gives the living entity freedom to play, and then again come home, back to Godhead. He says, all right, you want to play? But when you are tired of all this nonsense, give it up and come back to me. That's quote. Now, Prabhupada, this world is like a playground for conditioned souls, and the body is like a small field, Chetra, on which the living entity wants to play. This is all amazing things that Prabhupada is saying, right? He's not bewildered by Hegel's big words, Weltgeist and logos and things like that. He understands what the truth is. Therefore, every time there's a Mayavad statement, immediately he brings it to Krishna. That's preaching. That's knowledge. That is effective preaching. So then he says, this world is like a playground for conditioned souls, and the body is like a small field, Kshetra, on which the living entity wants to play. And then he quotes a verse. Idam saridam konteya, Kshetram iti abhidiyate. Itadyo vetitam prahu, Kshetra gya iti tadvidah. This body, O son of Kunti, is called the field, and one who knows this body is called the knower of the field. Bhagavad-Gita, 13th chapter, 2nd verse. The material body is nothing but a field of action, and Krishna says, all right, utilize this field and enjoy yourself. When you're exhausted playing in this field, you can have another. In this way, the living entity is changing bodies, changing different fields of action. Shamsundar, is this play aimless, or is there gradual evolution? Srila Prabhupada, there is a goal. Krishna gives us knowledge. Yeah, he speaks Bhagavad-Gita, right? And the Vedas are also there. They're books of transcendental knowledge. Krishna says, this play is not very healthy. Therefore, I request that you give it up and come back to me. This is the plan. Now, just like if you're a parent and you have, let's say, 3 or 4 children, and one of your children revolts against you and says, I don't accept your authority anymore. I don't want to listen to anything you say, and I'm leaving, and I'm going to go out there and show you that I know what I'm doing and that you don't know what you're doing. Well, that would be very insulting for the parent. But a real parent would remain calm and pray to Krishna, please give my son or daughter the intelligence to come back and not act whimsically like this. So, Krishna is the father of all living entities. And he doesn't have like 1 or 2 or 3 children. He's got untold numbers, an infinite number of living entities have come from him. And everyone is important for him. But they get so entangled in the material world, they end up with bodies like, rats and snakes and bugs and fish and so forth. And then they have to very slowly go through the whole process of slow evolution of consciousness. There's not an evolution of bodies. They're all created in the beginning of time. It's the evolution of consciousness. And eventually come back again to the human form of life, where there's another chance that they can understand Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagvatam, and then straighten out their behavior and go back to Godhead. That's the plan. Okay, you want to go to the material world? I would not suggest it, because it's gunamaya, it's my inferior spiritual energy, but it's spiritual and eternal, therefore you will not be able to overcome it. But I'm giving you some confidential knowledge. If you surrender to me, you can be liberated from this whole cycle of birth and death in the material world, an illusory life. So the plan is for the material world to give the living entities a chance to try and emulate Krishna, which is impossible, to try and control material nature, which is impossible because it's under the control of Krishna. It's not a temporary thing. It's an eternal thing. And it also disappears. So how are you going to control it? You'll never be able to control it. You might control a very small part of it, but then you'll be defeated. So, after many, many lives, Bahanam Janmanam Ante Gyanavam Prapadyante Vasudeva Savamiti Samahatma Sudurlabha, of trying to control material nature, of trying to become God. And when you fail and keep failing life after life, eventually you come to the realization, I don't want to suffer anymore. And I don't want to be an illusion anymore, thinking I can do something that's actually impossible. Now I'm beginning to read Bhagavad-Gita. It makes sense to me. I failed so many times in so many different births. And eventually, I'm learning my lesson that I should not continue speculating. I should not continue challenging the authority of Krishna. I should surrender to the Lord. And I know that He'll take care of me. And He'll give me knowledge and He'll give me guidance through His gurus, Shiksha and Diksha gurus, and even directly from the heart. So, therefore, I no longer want to be playing in the field of this material body. I want to be back to Godhead and playing with Krishna in Goloka, Vrindavan, or worshipping Narayana in Vaikuntha. So, Prabhupada says, yes, there is a goal. Krishna gives us knowledge, and the Vedas are also there. Krishna says, this play is not very healthy. This play, what do you mean? They're playing with sense gratification. It's not a healthy thing. You'll be defeated. Right? Therefore, I request that you give it up and come back to me. This is the plan. Sarvadharmam prityaja mami kam saranam vraja ham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshisyami mahasuchaha. Shamsundar. According to the Hegelian dialectic, being and nothing are empty abstractions. Being is the thesis, nothing is the antithesis, and the synthesis is change, becoming. Okay, again, using all these different words, you have to figure out what they mean and what he's trying to say here. What he's saying, okay, what is the dialectic? It is a way of interpreting history. In other words, in history, if you study history, you'll see somebody has an idea. Everybody should eat meat. Okay. So now everybody's eating meat. And then people are getting sick, they're getting tummy aches, they're getting headaches, they're getting cancer. So somebody else comes up with a different idea. No, we shouldn't eat meat. We should just eat vegetables. Okay. So they just eat vegetables, but a lot of people say, well, I feel weak all the time and I'm always hungry. I never get full. So then somebody else has an idea and says, well, okay, you have to have your strength. You have to feeling a satiation after you eat. If you're not getting it from the vegetables, then let's eat a little bit of meat and a little bit of vegetables. Okay, so the first thing is the thesis. The second thing is the antithesis. And the third thing is called the synthesis. Okay? A lot of sis's in there. So the thesis, the first idea, let's all eat meat. And then because there's some problems, then someone says, oh, yeah, no, let's now just eat vegetables, no meat. So that's the antithesis. It's the opposite. And then there's problems with that. So then somebody else said, well, let's eat a little meat and a little bit of vegetables. Okay, that's the synthesis. You put together those two ideas, you have a new idea. Okay, so when you analyze history, the dialectic means you see this pattern of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis going on over and over again. It's repeating itself over and over again. And in another few pages, Prabhupada will say, history is repetition. And he said, history always repeats itself. Okay, we'll come to that, how he says that. So now, Shamsundar says, according to the Hegelian dialectic, now we know what dialectic means. This repeated process that Hegel says is going on all the time. This thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. And the synthesis becomes the next thesis. Okay. So it says, according to Hegelian dialectic, being and nothing are empty abstractions. Being is the thesis, nothing is the antithesis, and the synthesis is change, becoming. Prabhupada. The question of becoming arises because we are now in this awkward, marginal position. Although I am eternal, I have been trapped by something mortal. That's the body. I'm trapped in this body, and the body is mortal. It's going to die, get old, get sick. Consequently, I am changing my position. And this is called transmigration. Yeah, I'm going to die, and if I'm still have material desires, I'm going to get another body. This is a change, changing the position. And I'm not quite sure what the next body will be. It's going to depend on my karma that I've acquired in this lifetime and in previous lifetimes, and it's going to also be influenced by the last thoughts in my mind when I die. Consequently, I am changing my position, and this is called transmigration. When I cease transmigrating, I attain my own true being, which is eternal. In other words, when we give up this process of karma and material desires and become Krishna conscious, that'll finish this transmigrating from one body to another. That's not the ultimate solution, but that's a step in the right direction. Shyam Sundar says, Hegel believes that when the dialectic is exhausted, it reveals the whole, unified, absolute truth. But since nature is constantly unfolding, guided by the world spirit, the dialectic process continues indefinitely. This is complete nonsense, right? I mean, if you understand what it says, you realize this is a nonsense thought. And Prabhupada picks up on it immediately. He says, in other words, you cannot find out the ultimate synthesis. Therefore, you have to receive information from Shastra. The thesis is that the soul within the body is immortal, and the antithesis is that the body is mortal. The liberation of the soul from the body is the synthesis. When we understand that we are in an awkward position within this material world, we strive for liberation. Unless we understand that we are entrapped, there's no question of liberation. Prabhupada has nailed it. Nailed it. Shut. Finished. This is the truth. No more of this nonsense that you're going to go on eternally with thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. That's basically what Hegel was saying. He says, but since nature is constantly unfolding, meaning constantly evolving, guided by the world spirit. Now, who is the world spirit, right? This Weltgeist, the spirit of the world. You know, that's the way of saying, impersonally, it's saying God, right? So the nature is constantly unfolding, guided by the world spirit. The dialectic process continues indefinitely. So in other words, this whole thing is hopeless. There's no hope for humanity if you read Hegel. But if you hear the Prabhupada, if you listen to Prabhupada, there's plenty of hope. In fact, Lord Chaitanya made it easy to go back to Godhead and stop this whole process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? And then Prabhupada says, the liberation from of the soul from the body is the synthesis. When we understand that we are in an awkward position within this material world, we strive for liberation. Unless we understand that we are entrapped, there's no question of liberation. You have someone say, hey, I like it in prison. I got 3 square meals a day. I can sleep all I want. I can read books. I can go out and work on the weightlifting and play basketball, and and I can watch television. I mean, man, this is like paradise for me, being in jail. So Yeah, and also I get drugs and I have illicit sex in jail. So, what's wrong with it? Outside I have to work. Here people serve me meals every day, and I got my own room. I got my own private toilet in my cell. Okay, I got to share it with some other idiot, but that's all right. He keeps in his space. I keep in my space in the 50 square feet of the room. When that's pretty small. Sometimes it's even smaller, this cell. So basically, people are saying, "Oh, I don't mind, birth and death," because the scientists say one day they're going to find a solution to birth and death, and I'll be immortal, and I can have sense gratification in this body for eternity, And every time something breaks down, like a heart, they'll just replace it with another heart. In fact, they just replaced a human being with a pig's heart. Can you imagine that? They put a pig's heart. It was in the news. It was in the news 2 days ago. Anyway, this is all nonsense, right? And Prabhupada puts an end to it right now. So then Shamsundar says, Hegel understood the absolute truth to be always changing and yet always permanent. Again, nonsense statement. Prabhupada, the absolute truth does not change. Even we are permanent, being part and parcel of Krishna. We are permanent, even though we are moving about in these material bodies. Although Krishna manifests himself in various expansions, he remains the same. So now it's getting serious because one after the other, Hegel is saying, if what Shamsundar is saying is correct interpretation of Hegel, he's saying things that are nonsense. Prabhupada says, the absolute does not change. Even if we are permanent, even we are permanent. We, the jivas, are permanent. Being part and parcel of Krishna. We are permanent, even though we are moving about in these material bodies. Although Krishna manifests himself in various expansions, he remains the same. So our soul is eternal. It can't be burned. It can't be dried. It can't be wet. It can't be burnt. It can't die. The soul is eternal. So we are also permanent. Shamsundar. Hegel saw the absolute truth unfolding itself in history, biology, sociology, and other sciences. Srila Prabhupada. Krishna is the center of everything, and everything is emanating from him. The temporary manifestations come from Krishna and then return to Krishna. History is simply repetition. Yeah, birth, old age, disease, and death. That's the history. And it's being repeated over and over again in different bodies. Eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. It's being repeated over and over again in different bodies. Right? And so, now Shamsundar says, for Hegel, God, or the absolute truth, manifests itself in 3 forms. The idea in itself, the idea for itself, and the idea in and for itself. Srila Prabhupada. This means that he is trying to create God. By the way, that was another example of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So when it says the idea in itself, the idea for itself, and the idea in and for itself, right? So Hegel is playing games. He's trying to figure out, what is God, right? He's trying to create his own God. That's what he's trying to do. For him, God is an idea. Is this his philosophy? He's asking Shamsundar. The Mayavadis also believe that actually there is no God, that God is created by man's imagination, that he is impersonal or dead. So many people are busy creating God. Vivekananda, for instance, claimed Ramakrishna to be God. So Hegel is trying to create his God and sort of equate it to the world spirit, right? Weltgeist, or the logos, as the Greeks, and then the Christians that that borrowed this idea from the Greeks, and say that the logos is Jesus, right? Okay. So then he says, right away understood when he hears idea in itself, idea for itself, and idea in and for itself, Prabhupada immediately says, this means that he is trying to create God. For him, God is an idea. Is this his philosophy? So now another disciple, Hayagriva Das, he says, in maintaining that God's essence is thought and thinking, despite whatever images God may assume, Hegel is basically an impersonalist. He writes, God is in his very essence thought and thinking, however his image and configuration be determined otherwise. So he's saying, God doesn't have a form. He's just thought and thinking. And this is the idea of the logos, the universal rationale, or the universal reason in nature. It's this impersonal thing. Now, Prabhupada says, if God is absolute, his image is also absolute, and also God. If God is absolute, his words are also absolute, and are non-different from him. The image of God worshipped in the temple is God himself, because God is absolute. God says that earth, water, fire, and everything else is his energy. And if we think that the image of God is made of stone, we must acknowledge that the stone is God's energy. Even though a copper wire may not be electricity, it carries electricity, and if you touch it, you will understand it to be non-different from electricity. We may think materially that an object is different from God, but spiritually, everything is God. Arche Vishno Shiladir Gurusu Naramatir Vishnave Jati Buddhi. One who considers the Archamurti, or the worshipable deity of God, of Lord Vishnu, to be stone, the spiritual master to be an ordinary human being, and a Vaishnava to belong to a particular caste or creed, is possessed of hellish intelligence and is doomed. This is a verse from the Padma Purana. Now, why did Prabhupada start talking about deity? Because Hayagriva, quoting Hegel, says, God is in his very essence thought and thinking. However, his image and configuration be determined otherwise. So instead, he says, regardless of what statues or idols you make of God, God is actually just thought and thinking. And any images you make of him or configurations you make of him, he's got this form or that form, that's just nonsense. And that's why he says God is in his very essence thought and thinking. So Prabhupada said, wait a minute, Krishna is absolute. Not only he's absolute, even if you make a deity of Krishna and it's correctly made and pran pratishtha is performed, it's non-different than Krishna. Okay, and because let's say you carve the deity out of rock, the rock is made of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Those are elements that are coming from Krishna. They belong to Krishna. So if you make the form with rock that corresponds to the description of Krishna in the Shastra, and then it's sanctified by genuine devotees, it's non-different than Krishna. And then he quotes this verse, Arche Vishnu Siladir Gurusu. One who considers the Archamurti, or worshipable deity of Lord Vishnu, to be stone, the spiritual master to be an ordinary human being, and a Vaishnava to belong to a particular caste or creed, is possessed of hellish intelligence and is doomed. Whoa. So getting serious now, Prabhupada is critiquing Hegel in very, let's say, strong words. And Prabhupada continues, we should not look upon the deity as something material, as stone or Shila. As soon as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw the Jagannatha deity, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu immediately fainted. In order to realize God's omnipresence, we must be trained to follow God's instructions. It appears that Hegel is theorizing that God is an idea, but God is substance. So substance means the real concrete thing. And the facsimile of the substance, let's say the reflection of the substance, that's not the real thing. It just indicates that there is a real thing. The reflection indicates there is the real thing, but the reflection itself is not the real thing. So Krishna is substance. He's not just an idea or a concept. Sham Sundar. And what do you mean by substance? Srila Prabhupada. Substance is something concrete. You may form an idea of a golden mountain, but there's a difference between that idea and the golden mountain itself. When you actually see and touch a golden mountain, it is a fact. That fact is substance. Shamsundar. For Hegel, there is idea, substance, and synthesis, which is spirit. Whoa. Trying to be very smart here. He says there's an idea, and then there's substance, and then a synthesis, which is spirit or soul. Srila Prabhupada, according to our philosophy, spirit is realized in three phases: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. It has nothing to do with idea and substance, and then their synthesis becomes a soul. What if the idea is speculation? What if the substance is not related to Krishna? And you put them together, you're not going to get Krishna. But if you understand Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, then you'll end up with Krishna. Realizing Brahman is like realizing the sunshine, which is impersonal. Realizing Paramatma is like realizing the sun disk itself, which is localized. However, if we have the capacity to enter the sun, we will see the sun God himself, and this may be compared to Bhagavan realization, the personal feature of God. See, now I gave an example, right? Now, an analogy. Now, analogy is not proof, but it helps people who don't believe in the Shastra to understand that spiritual concept. Once we realize the personal feature of God, or Krishna, we automatically understand the impersonal and localized features. According to Brahma Samhita 540, the impersonal Brahmajyoti is the bodily rays of Krishna. Similarly, Paramatma is the localized feature of Krishna, sitting in everyone's heart as Paramatma. The sun is one, not many, but it is capable of being reflected in countless water pots. If you put them 12 noon in the sunlight, you'll see a reflection of sun in each water pot. So, water pot meaning it has a pot with a big round, let's say, open top to it. So if you put it 12 noon under the hot sun, you'll see the reflection in each pot of the sun. One who sees the sun's reflections in the pots may think, oh, there are millions of suns. One who has seen only the sunshine thinks of the sun impersonally. But when one knows the sun God, he has attained personal realization. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is a person, Sri Krishna. When you have a clear conception of God, you understand this. You cannot make God into an idea Ideas arise because there is substance. Wonderful. Prabhupada nailed it again. Shyam Sundar. Hegel uses the word idea to refer to a rational form which precedes material or physical form. Srila Prabhupada. It is stated, see, Prabhupada's not letting him get away with anything. See? It is stated in Brahma Samhita. See, immediately goes back to Shastra by bona fide Vedic authorities like Lord Brahma himself. It is stated in Brahma Samhita that Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has form, vigraha, but that kind of form is this: Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha. Krishna is the Supreme Godhead, and he has an eternal, blissful, and spiritual body. Brahma Samhita 5.1. Sat means eternal. Presently we have bodies which are asat, temporary, but Krishna's body is different from ours. The word Ananda means blissful. Krishna is always blissful. And Chit means knowledge. Krishna knows everything. In this way, he is different from us. He is not an idea, but substance itself. See, Prabhupada's not caving in, not being intimidated by all these so-called erudite statements of Hegelian philosophy. Shyam Sundar. When we were discussing Plato, you agreed that the ideal precedes the physical representation. See, Shyam Sundar's not giving up either, right? He's trying to catch Prabhupada. So Plato said that there is a spiritual world, but it's static, and it has perfect forms in it that are static also. So there are many tables in this world, and they're going to exist for some time and then disappear because they're material things. But in the spiritual world, there's an eternal table that's perfect, and it's never changing. That's his philosophy of the spiritual world. And Shyam Sundar, who previously read about Plato and discussed it with Prabhupada, he says, you agreed that the ideal precedes the physical representation, that the ideal specimen would precede the existence of the facsimile of that perfect ideal. Prabhupada, from the Shastras we learn that there is a spiritual world and that this material world is a perverted reflection of that world, that spiritual world. From the Shastras we also understand that the houses in the spiritual world are made of chintamani, chintamani prakara sadmasu. In this world, we have no experience of chintamani, philosopher's stone, a stone that turns other metals to gold, but we may have some idea by hearing from authorities. It is not that we manufacture or think up the spiritual world. In other words, we have ideas of substances which we may not have seen. Okay. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry. This is Prabhupada said that. Okay. Now, Shyam Sundar says, for Hegel, spirit generates ideas and actualizes them. Srila Prabhupada, we say that everything comes from Krishna. Why just ideas and substances? Why this or that? Why so many distinctions? Everything comes from Krishna. Unless there is substance in the spiritual world, nothing could exist. In the final analysis, we have to accept the fact that everything is emanating from substance. Janmadasya, all ideas can be traced back to the original substance, which is Krishna. Therefore, Krishna says, everything is emanating from me. Janmadasya yata niviyadi taratas chartesu avigyaswarat. If you attain Krishna, therefore you attain the ultimate substance. If you understand God, you understand everything. Shyam Sundar. Then you would say that form precedes idea not that idea precedes form? Srila Prabhupada, yes, form precedes idea. Krishna says, Sarvasya chaham hridi sanivisto matak smriti jnanam apahanam cham. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Bhagavad-Gita 15.15. As far as man is concerned, he cannot invent anything. He can only discover things that are already there. Wow, Prabhupada is not, he's so sharp. Shamsundar, I agree with, they can't even put one little pin into the absolute truth that Prabhupada is presenting. Shamsundar, Hegel sees idea and substance opposing one another as thesis and antithesis. Spirit is the synthesis containing both. So that was already said before, right? And it's coming back to that. Srila Prabhupada, yes, we agree. Viruddhartha sambandha. Contradictory things are adjusted in Krishna. So Prabhupada is so sharp. He came up with a Vedic evidence here that that everything is reconciled by Krishna's unimaginable and infinite energy. So, viruddhartha sambandha. Contradictory things are adjusted in Krishna. Therefore, we say that Krishna is inconceivable. He is simultaneously one with and different from his creation. Since it is impossible to conceive of these things in the material world, they are called inconceivable. Shamsundar. Then, if we can conceive of something, must it exist somewhere? Srila Prabhupada. Yes, it is a fact that you cannot conceive of anything that does not have existence. In this material world, we understand that 1 plus 1 equals 2, and that 1 minus 1 equals 0. But in the spiritual world, this law does not apply. There, 1 plus 1 equals 1, and 1 minus 1 equals 1. Shamsundar. But what of the idea that God is evil? Can I conceive of this? Srila Prabhupada. Yes, God is also evil, but not according to our understanding. God is absolute, and evil and good are reconciled in him. We cannot say that because we think of God as evil, that he is evil. Rather, we say that he is all good because he is absolute. He has complete, incredible powers. Therefore, he can resolve all issues. He can resolve all dualities. Everything is resolved by Krishna. Everything is conceived by Krishna. Everything is harmonized by Krishna. Okay, so we'll stop right there. What time is it now? 9:11. 9:11. Okay. Yes, 9:11 is a good place to stop. Right? So, are there any questions? Now, why are we going into this so deeply? It will last maybe 1 or 2 more times, this discussion of Hegel, because you're seeing how Prabhupada preaches. You're seeing how he can defeat all these so-called great philosophers and point out all the mistakes they're making by their speculation. And you can see their technique. They come up with these words and concepts, and you have to struggle to understand what they're talking about. And then at a certain point, after they've used, like Weltgeist or Zeitgeist, that's another Geist, it's another world theory. So then they put multiple of these phrases and words together. You don't understand anything. You see, this is their trick. Any questions? Huh? Okay. Go ahead.
Rocket sound.
You can use this microphone. It's all right.
So here's the question. Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, you were discussing about the three conditions: formless, form itself, and merging into formlessness, or merging into formless. How do we understand our state as a soul when our in the third condition?
Just say that again, but go a little louder and slower. You were saying?
You were discussing about the three conditions: formlessness, form itself, and merging into the formless. How do we understand our state as a soul when we are in the third condition?
Well, that's not our philosophy. That is what the Mayavadis is saying. Mayavadis are saying. Our philosophy is that you have an eternal form. And your soul has an eternal form, and it's made of Sat, Chit, Ananda, and Vigraha. It's a form of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. And it's a specific form. It could be a gopi or a gopa or a cow or a tree in the spiritual world, and it's eternal. So that was an example of the speculators. It's not the example of Krishna consciousness.
So as part of that, how is this different than what Mayavadis say about merging into the Supreme Brahman? Meaning merging into formlessness.
Whatever they're saying is not Krishna conscious philosophy, right? So you never really lose your form. You artificially think. You artificially stop thinking, stop acting, even stop breathing, and you attain this so-called formless state. But it's an illusory state. It's not a real state. And because of that, people fall down from the Brahmajyoti. Even after all the trouble they went to merge into it, they fall down again. Because your soul has an eternal form. Right? And it has eternal existence. So it's just this idea of merging into the eternal light emanating throughout the material universe and the spiritual world. It doesn't mean that all the pencils of light or all the sparks of light are formless. Don't forget, the size of the soul is 1/10,000th the tip of a hair, right? So, and that 1/10,000th tip of the hair is in this body, right? In your body, in my body, and our body takes a form. Why? Because the soul has a form. So if you want to make a puppet, right? There has to be something inside the puppet. If it's just air, it'll either burst or deflate. So there has to be something inside. There has to be some substance. The real substance is Krishna and our soul. Krishna is the super soul, and we are the jiva soul. So therefore, Krishna has a form, and we have a form. It might be very minuscule, but still there's a form. And on the basis of that form, due to illusory desires for sense gratification, you get a particular type of body, right? But the body is built up on the basis of that form, which is the real substance, right? And the body is always changing, right? So we start small, like you start like a emulsion, and it becomes a little pea, and then it becomes a little embryo, and then it grows up big enough, and then it's fully developed, then it's pushed out, and you get a little baby like this, right? And then it keeps growing, and then at a certain point it starts deteriorating, and then it disappears. So all that happened because the substance was inside of it. The substance is our individual soul and Krishna. So because the dimensions are either too small for us to comprehend, or too big for us to comprehend, so therefore we get confused. So in the case of this question of formlessness, that there's no such thing as formlessness. You have an eternal form, but it's very small, so you might not be able to see it right now. But if you engage in Krishna consciousness, your eternal form will be revealed to you. Just like when you first started, you were a little sperm, and it connected with the ovum, and it's like microscopic, but that was you. You can't say it wasn't you. So in the same way, your soul is less than microscopic. It's on the atomic level, less than atomic level. It's smaller than an atom, right? But that's who we are. And when we develop the right consciousness, it expands into a beautiful body of people in the spiritual world, in Vaikuntha, they're four-armed, like Narayana. And in Goloka, they're two-armed. And they have these beautiful forms because they've developed pure love for Krishna, or pure love for Narayana. So they have a form, an eternal form, to relate to the Lord and to express their love for the Lord. So these things may seem like incredible, unbelievable, but it's fact. And the more we purify ourselves, the more we understand it. And we understand that the real substance is Krishna and the soul. That's the real substance. See, we need Prabhupada in order to see through all this gobbledygook of these philosophers, right? They're just making up things. Now, sometimes they come a little close to reality of Vedic knowledge, and Prabhupada said, yes, that's our process, but then he gives the correct understanding of it. Now, you want to learn how Prabhupada was preaching, here it is right now. You're seeing a real demonstration of it. Okay?
He did have one other question. I haven't really read it.
Yeah? What is it?
Maharaj, you were discussing the example of a table.
Yeah.
The table is not permanent, but it is temporary, so it is not real, but it is illusion. Should we call it?
No, it's not. When you say it's not. The table is still. It has temporary existence. So if I get this so-called illusory illusion that's a table, right, and hit you over the head with it, you realize it's not an illusion, it's real, right? But it's not going to last forever. At one point it's going to disappear. So the illusion is the thing that will last forever, and I can enjoy it forever. That's the illusion. But when I hit you over the head with the table, you know that it's a real thing, right? So it's not false, but it's not eternal. So the desire to enjoy it eternally, that's an illusion. I'm not going to be able to enjoy it eternally. I may be eternal, but not the form of this table, or the television, or the car, or whatever. And by the way, it doesn't belong to me. Everything belongs to Krishna. If I use it selfishly, then I'm in complete illusion. If I use it in service to Krishna, then it's connected, then it's dovetailed to Krishna. There's no karma involved. Yeah. Haribol. Srila Prabhupada